Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
Look, 2020 has proven to be the year of many things, and the same for 2022. But if you're a small business, this could also be the year you switch to a better payroll. Gusto wasn't just built for small businesses, it was built for the people behind them. Their online payroll is easy to use. Gusto can automatically calculate paychecks and file all your payroll taxes, which means you have more time to run your business. Plus, Gusto does way more than payroll. Gusto helps with time tracking, health insurance, 401ks, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. It's super easy to set up and get started. If you're moving from another provider, they can transfer all your data for you. It's no surprise that 94% of customers are likely to recommend Gusto. And here's the best part. Because you're a listener to this podcast, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/compliance. That's gusto.com/compliance. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today. The Daily Compliance News for September 28, 2021. The fraud in phone call edition. And we begin with that story, one of the most odd stories I've come across lately. And believe me, I've come across some odd stories. Goldman Sachs was closing on a deal to invest in Ozy, a digital media company. And they were on one of the final con calls, or Zoom conferences, I should say, that Ozy arranged with YouTube for Goldman Sachs. The scheduled participants were there, and the lead guy for Goldman Sachs was late, so he suggested they move to a phone call or con call as opposed to a Zoom call. And as they began to have the call, at some point, it became apparent to one of the persons on the call that it was not the voice of the YouTube executive. It turns out it was the Ozy founder who was using voice mimicking software to impersonate the YouTube executives. And I raise this not only because it's so odd that someone would try to defraud Goldman Sachs by posing as a YouTube executive, but this potentially has some very significant ramifications for internal investigations or any other phone call. So watch out, compliance professionals. Next up from the South China News, first-time contributor to the Daily Compliance News, China steps up an anti-corruption drive as Evergrande crisis puts the spotlight on the financial sector in China. China's top anti-corruption official will launch a nationwide audit of major financial firms and regulators to eliminate risk in that area. From NPR, it reports that Google is appealing a $5 billion antitrust fine in the EU. It heads to the top European court Monday to appeal its record in an antitrust case where a penalty was imposed for stifling competition through the dominance of its Android system. Good luck with that, Google. And our final story comes to us from Bloomberg, who reports that a board member at the NRA has sued in the civil action in the state court of New York to intervene, claiming that the NRA current executives defrauded the board and that the board needs to have an independent investigation into the allegations against Wayne Pierre and the other executives who are basically accused of looting the NRA for their own personal gain. So this is a really interesting development. You now have the board claiming that the executive officers of the organization are engaged in fraud and need to be thrown out. You have the Attorney General of New York basically claiming the same thing, although she wants to dissolve the entire NRA because of its continued corruption. Of course, the board has consistently backed LaPierre, and when certain board members tried to get investigations going, they ended up getting kicked off. So interesting development in the NRA fraud case in the state of New York.
The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.